chat, and so I have a handful of questions. So when it's a 4-unit building and you put on an ADU and it changes it to a 5-unit building, does it change it, obviously from residential now it becomes a commercial deal? So what happens in that situation?
So that's a little bit dependent on jurisdiction. A lot of our clients, we've been able to successfully keep the projects not converting to commercial properties. Okay. Because the thing is that ADUs by definition are an accessory to the primary unit. So that's really how the law intended to treat them, was they are not secondary units. And we see that because, for example, if you have a single, let's say you have a property that's zoned, you could potentially have multiple properties on it, but it only has a single family home on it. ADUs enjoy special privileges that secondary units would not enjoy, like the waiver of development impact fees, like the waiver of having to add additional parking. And so they are actually not classified in the same way.
Okay. And what about, like, is there a difference between ADUs, so the attached dwellings, or do they have to be separated from what you're conveying as far as maximum of livable square footage? Does that change that?
Sorry, I'm not understanding the question.
Attached dwelling units versus detached dwelling units.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so if the ADU is attached to the primary, you can build up to 50% of the square footage of the primary. Okay. So if you have a 1,200 square foot house and you want to do an attached ADU, it could be up to 600 square feet. Versus if you were to do a standalone unit, you're going to have a lot more flexibility in kind of going larger if you care to.
So even though you build, even though you have the square footage of an existing single family residence and you want to make an attached dwelling facility, but you're already at your maximum lot capacity for the house, you can still add on to that to a certain level?
Correct. Okay. So the nice thing about these new state requirements is that up to a certain square footage, they're going to trump any kind of floor area ratio requirements or lot coverage requirements that would have restricted homeowners previously. So the state recognizes that we are in a dire need for additional housing. And so they're trying to make this low-hanging fruit for people so that as many ADUs can be built. So the state is really on your side trying to make these possible.
Okay. Is there a limitation on subterranean square footage, so that you put a game room or a sound studio or theater down below, and then 1 or 2 stories above ground? Can you go that route, even because that becomes a 3-story? Does that require an architect? Was the question, or is that even permissible to go subterranean on an ADU to begin with?
You can go subterranean on an ADU. We don't see it done almost ever. In fact, I've never seen it done. Not to say it's not happening, but it's mostly a cost issue. Obviously digging out and excavating is very expensive to do. And there's a whole host of structural engineering issues that then come up. So I don't see why you couldn't do it, but we don't see a lot of homeowners doing it. I think that would probably be a pretty expensive project to undertake. And then you would still have to abide by whatever the square footage requirements, obviously, even if it's subterranean, that still counts towards your square footage requirement. And I would have to look into if you could actually have, 1 story below ground and 2 above. Likely that would not work. The city is going to count that as a 3-story, even if it's only, 27 feet tall, ultimately.
Okay.
I see another question.
Yeah, I was going to say one question that I actually had was, regarding actually getting, just gravity drainage flow from your sewer system, things like that. I'm assuming if you're on level ground, depending on where your sewer line is, to just attach into that, or oftentimes you're going to have a pump to pump the sewage up into the main line, correct?
Yeah, again, this is where it gets a little granular, and different jurisdictions are going to handle it in different ways. Some let you plumb into the existing plumbing of the main house. Others require you to connect into the lateral at the front of the property. That's honestly a lot more annoying to have to do. But there are jurisdictions that require you to plumb directly to the lateral. So yeah, it just kind of depends.
Okay.
In terms of what are the effective ADUs on property taxes, I just want to touch on that briefly. So obviously Prop 13 is a huge deal for Californians. And because a lot of our clients, are baby boomers and have owned their house for a very long time, that's a big concern for them. So when you build an accessory dwelling unit, the state or the city is going to do what's called a blended assessment. So they will not reassess the value of the entire property. They will just reassess the value of the ADU alone and add that to your existing tax basis. So you don't have to worry about it triggering a reassessment for the entire property. And then what we're seeing in terms of kind of value establishment is that it's roughly 1% of the, slightly less than 1% of the construction cost is generally what's being added to your tax basis. So if you built a $200,000 or $200,000 ADU, you can expect your property taxes are going to go up close to $2,000.
Okay. But doesn't trigger a reassessment. That's great to know.
It does not. Yeah, that's a big deal to people.
Yeah. And then what is the typical design cost for, say, a 400 to 500 square foot garage conversion?
Yeah. Design costs are going to vary, obviously, depending on, what firm you're working with and kind of their level of credibility. We're seeing design costs for garage conversions typically start at about $10,000. I know that, for example, we did my mom's garage conversion in San Diego a year or two ago, and her design fees were $12,000 on her project. So, somewhere in kind of that range is pretty standard.
And can you expand a garage conversion and still keep it within 4 feet of the property line?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so here's the deal on garages. So a lot of garages are built on the lot lines, which means they don't have any setback at all. And so the great thing about a garage conversion is that you can convert it without work. You don't have to conform to that 4-foot setback. So anything that was legally permitted as an accessory structure can be converted without having to, be in line with the setback requirements. Now, for any new construction, so let's say we're going to expand on that garage, any of the new construction now has to conform to the new setback requirements. So if my garage was on the lot line and I want to expand it, I can't expand it on the lot line. I have to conform to those setback requirements.
And I would assume that would also trigger, depending on if you've got utilities right there and you have a utility easement, if you were to go up, then that becomes a different problem.
It does.
So they need access to power lines.
We run into that quite frequently in Los Angeles, where there's power line easement issues. So yeah, that is something we definitely have worked with. And again, I'm putting the link into that ADU regulations cheat sheet into the chat, guys, too. So we update that regularly. And if you guys want the specifics on how different, kind of all the different regulations in play, that's a really good place to start.
And another question, is there a limit to how many ADUs you can put on a single family resident home property? Is that one, or can you put multiple? Okay. Yes.
So you can only put one ADU per single family residence, but you can add a JADU in addition to an ADU. I kind of hate JADUs. I think that people think that they're something that they're not. A JADU is a junior accessory dwelling unit. And if you guys are interested in that, I would just say email me separately, because it's a long conversation, probably too long of a conversation to have for the time that we have, but they're not as great as people think they are. So yeah, single family homes, you can add one ADU and a JADU per property.
Okay. And then are you seeing a lot of delays getting, because the cities, so many of them are really delayed in their processing because of COVID? What is kind of the time frame you're seeing from when a client says, let's turn in our application, to getting approved?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly been some delays in the process, but cities are kind of working through it. And I think on the other end, we're going to be a lot better off ultimately than we were before. And I think the reason for that is that cities were requiring most designers to print their plans and submit physical copies of plans into the planning department, which is like, hello guys, we're in the 21st century, right? Like we can digitally submit. So now all these cities have moved to digital submissions, but the problem is that they didn't have that infrastructure set up ahead of time. So we saw some delays initially as they were trying to put those things in place. And I think the longer we're kind of in this period, honestly, the easier and more streamlined it'll be ultimately. But yeah, I think, COVID is, certainly unprecedented time. So we are still permitting projects. We're still getting projects through. We're still submitting new projects. But, I think factoring in a little bit of patience and padding your timeline a little bit is a good idea.
Okay. One more question. I know there's more, but you guys can discuss offline. But for financing, what are you seeing? I know that you guys have a partnership with Loan Depot. Loan Depot is one of our partners in a number of offices as well. From a financing perspective, what are people able to generally get? Are they getting a HELOC equity line on their house and then using that money to do the work, or how are they financing most of this?
Yeah, so you don't have a ton of options for financing. You can do a home equity line of credit. You can do a cash out refinance. The other big way is renovation loan, which is obviously a bit more kind of hoops to jump through. But if you don't have any equity in the house or the property is newly purchased, that's probably your best route. We're also seeing families pool resources together to purchase ADUs. So like, mom lives in Arizona. She's going to sell her house there. She wants to move in with her kids in Oakland. So they're going to build the ADU in the backyard, and the family's going to kind of pool resources to make that happen. So we see that happening as well, especially on units where, families are going to kind of co-live together.